We have the Tribune's Dan Wiederer in studio today to break down the Bears draft. So let's start broad with this. They have 8 draft picks. Your overall reaction to what they were able to do last week?
Yeah, Cassie, I think they got a lot to work with here. Look, you have the first round tight end that you expect to be a really good fit for Ben Johnson. You give him another weapon in day 2 with Luther Burden. You address needs throughout the draft. And then day 3 for me a little bit was kind of a shrug-worthy day 3. Sometimes that's what day 3 is in the NFL draft. You're not expecting to get a bunch of stars there, but I do think that they're going to have to figure out a way to develop and work with some of those prospects so that they're not just big misses on the last day of the draft. I always say you can't really analyze free agency without the draft being complete, and you can't really analyze a draft without also reflecting on free agency. So when you pair those two things together and you see that the momentum that the Bears have created and some of the needs they have addressed, you understand that they're moving in the right direction.
They address some needs. They also leave some question marks of where they're going to fill some holes that are still on their roster. I was up in Green Bay. You were at Hallis Hall in Green Bay. It was all like, are the Bears actually going to trade up for Ashton Jeanty and really get this running back? I'm not sure if it was the same sort of scenario at Hallis Hall too, but they don't take him, and then they take Colston Loveland, a tight end, 10th overall, and really a guy that wasn't necessarily on my radar because there was so much talk about Tyler Warren and the Bears heading into this draft. But after watching the film and knowing what Ben Johnson has and had in Sam Laporta in Detroit, it started to make more sense, and you could see how Colston Loveland made sense for the Bears.
Well, you can see how he makes sense for Ben Johnson. You can see how he makes sense for Cole Kmet, and you can see how he makes sense for Caleb Williams. And so you pair those 3 guys together, and you see a really dynamic player that can fit into this offense and really give you a new dimension and a new dynamic to things. I think when you talk to evaluators throughout the pre-draft process, a lot of people had Loveland and Warren very close together, and I think it was similar at Hallis Hall with where they were stacked on the draft board. And so then you are looking for fit. And in Loveland, they see a guy that can be really dynamic as a pass catcher. Everyone talks about his ability to separate. Jeff King, the senior director of player personnel at Hallis Hall, talked about Todd Heap as a comp, as a guy who was really able to get snap at the top of the route, be able to create his own space, get distance from a defender, and become a really, really friendly target for a quarterback. Caleb Williams could use some more really friendly targets. And then as
he's got a lot now.
It's great, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a little bit. But when you think also about Cole, I think there was some worry there when that pick was made. Does this mean anything? Are the Bears going to get rid of Cole Kmet before the 2025 season starts? My answer to that is a big fat NO, capital letters. These two guys pair well together where Kmet can serve that inline dimension a little bit better, and then you can spread Loveland out as a chess piece. And with some of those other playmakers you have, it could get really fun for Ben Johnson.
Well, it could be really fun. We also talk about there's a lot of mouths to feed right now. When you look at that wide receiver room, I think it's worth mentioning, and I don't know how you want to read into this, that Ben Johnson complimented Ryan Poles for staying disciplined to the draft board. And you said you started to have more questions coming day 3. They take 2 luxury picks with the first 2 days. First, they go with Colston Loveland. Then they take Luther Burden III out of Mizzou, someone who dropped out of the first round, and now people are calling the steal of the draft. What do you think the Bears saw in him that maybe people didn't want to acknowledge in the first round?
Well, look, I think with Luther Burden, it's really easy. The talent is there. It's first-round talent. He's very dynamic. 2 years ago at Missouri, he had a huge year. The production dipped in 2024, and so the questions are why? What was the situation that took his performance down a level in 2024? I think there's some worry that he's a guy that doesn't necessarily respond well when the ball's not coming his way regularly. Well, guess what? The ball may not be coming your way regularly as a rookie in this offense with these playmakers that you have around you. DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Colston Loveland, Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift. There are a lot of mouths to feed. And so it is a challenge for Ben Johnson. This is a leadership challenge. You have to be able to massage egos. You have to be able to try to keep guys invested, engaged, and happy as they go through this process. I think production and winning will help, but that is still a challenge for a coach. And so could Luther Burden be the steal of the draft? Absolutely. Could he be a guy 3 or 4 years from now we're looking back and saying, oh yeah, of course it didn't work out? Absolutely. And so now it's in his hands. I do think the Bears took a big leap of faith in a couple things here. Number one, it's the passion that Luther Burden has and the competitive fire he has. And number 2, Antoine Randall, who we got to meet recently, and they believe him as the receivers coach can be a very productive overseer of what Luther Burden does in his daily existence up at Hallis Hall. That's going to be a big leap of faith for that coaching staff to get the most out of this pick.
Well, Ben Johnson also saw directly how Antoine Randall worked with Jamison Williams in Detroit. So I have strong belief that he has a ton of faith that he will be able to take in Luther Burden and build that relationship and coach him to his best potential. Here's what Ben Johnson had to say about having more talent on this roster.
If you want to play, you got to go earn it. If you want a role, you got to go earn it. They know that. So we were very straightforward and honest with them when they came into the building. I think all we did this weekend was we might have just turned up the notch, just a couple of dials for certain people in the building. So that's a good thing. That's a healthy thing. That's where you bring out the best, not only in your team, but in each individual.
All right, so Ben Johnson basically sending his message through the media, which he's done quite a few times at this point, to his entire team. There's no depth chart right now.
Right.
They're about to enter OTAs. And I think when I heard that, I initially was drawn to the wide receiver room. And
Sure.
Luther Burden, given the fact he was a 5-star recruit, he plays in the slot. We know how important that position is in Ben Johnson's offense. And Amon-Ra St. Brown
Sure.
having that role in Detroit. We know it's going to be different in Chicago. But is he going to be that guy for the Bears?
They see him having the ability to play outside. They see him the ability to be a dynamic slot receiver. And he can also be a guy that you can use as a ball carrier. Jet sweeps, maybe get creative, use him out of the backfield a little bit and figure out what you can do with him. It's going to be interesting, though, with all these pieces that you have to play with, because in Detroit, Ben Johnson's second tight end was Brock Wright. His number 3 receiver the last couple of years was either Josh Reynolds or Tim Patrick. These guys are used to playing roles. They're used to being complementary pieces and not the focal point of the offense. Now you've got 5, 6 guys on your offense that are used to being the alphas, and getting alphas to kind of step back and accept a lesser role is a challenge. And so they're going to have to do that with Luther. I mean, again, when you watch the tape and you see the highlights, you understand how explosive he can be, how good he is with the ball in his hands after the catch, or again as a ball carrier. They've got to tap into that. I think there's also a vote of confidence from inside Hallis Hall about what Ben Johnson can do to push the buttons properly with all these guys that he has.
Rock.
I mean, that's
it's like the quote of the offseason.
It's a leadership challenge, right? And they feel like he is going to be able to get response from players. As you and I both know, it remains to be seen whether that response actually comes.
It's a good would you rather. I'm like in my head right now trying to think of who was the number 3 receiver for the Bears 3 years ago.
Right. I was probably Byron Pringle, right?
Exactly. So would you rather have that problem,
yes,
or would you rather
100%.
have
Good
this
problem to have,
yes.
for sure.
I thought for sure the Bears were going to be taking a running back likely on day 2. They don't, and they missed the running backs out of Ohio State. The run on them, Caleb Johnson's taken in the 3rd round. So I'm looking at Kyle Monangai, a 7th round pick out of Rutgers, who coaches rave about him. That's fair. But is he a 3-down back? No. And who is the Bears' 3-down back that's going to be paired with DeAndre Swift now?
And Kyle Monangai is a round 7 pick.
Right.
So expectations have to be set accordingly. To your point, coaches rave about his tough running style, the way that he approaches his daily existence. He's a guy that is going to give you everything he has and squeeze every drop of potential from his journey. But he was also the 22nd running back taken in this draft. And so I do think that the board kind of moved away from the Bears this weekend. You mentioned Genty earlier. I think there was serious interest in seeing if they could find a price tag for a trade that would make that possible. Never did. Day 2, I think they were really interested in moving up to go get Travion Henderson, or hoping that he would fall to them at 39. It didn't happen. They traded out. The run on running backs kept occurring, and the Bears are the 21st team to dip into the running back shelf on day 3 of the draft. So now the question on who the complementary piece to DeAndre Swift is open-ended. Roschon Johnson, does he have a chance at having a more heightened role? Do they go back out into the free agency flea market, see what's left there, and see what's out there? Usually in May on the veteran free agency running back shelf, it's guys who are old, injured, or old and injured.
Nick Chubb, just address the obvious this week.
And so that's what you have to explore and figure out. Does that make sense now? Can we make the best of what we have in-house? And that's going to be part of their task in May to figure those questions out.
Did we maybe overplay the relationship that DeAndre Swift and Ben Johnson being spoiled in Detroit? And maybe Ben Johnson is higher on Swift, and credit that they overhauled the interior of the offensive line, and maybe he believes with those moves being made, Swift will have a more productive season. He had his worst productive season last year with 3.8 yards per carry.
Yeah, you mentioned that was a career low for DeAndre Swift, and they think that they can get him back on track by making him a little bit more disciplined and patient with how he follows his tracks, and so you hear from inside the building that Eric Bieniemy, the hard-driving running backs coach that was brought into Ben Johnson's staff, is going to be a great influence on a guy like DeAndre Swift and helping him understand, okay, listen, not every run has to go for 20 yards. If you can get this one for 3 instead of -2, we're going to take that. And then we're going to have another opportunity after we move the chains again to get you the ball again for another big play. And so that's going to be a challenge for DeAndre Swift to try to elevate his game if they can get that. If they can find that magic between DeAndre and Bieniemy and Ben Johnson, now all of a sudden you might start talking about the guy that the Bears invested heavily in a year ago in free agency.
You mentioned Roschon Johnson. You obviously hope he stays healthy, out of concussion protocol for this season. I was talking to Eric Bieniemy when we had the assistant coach availability and had those breakout sessions, and he mentioned Ian Wheeler multiple times. And I'm like, is this guy just like, do we forget about him because we fell in love with him on Hard Knocks? He tears his ACL. And is there potential in this guy that we're not thinking of right now?
Well, look, any running back coming back off an ACL injury, you have to see what it looks like. And so when the Bears get back on the practice field for OTAs, for minicamp, for training camp, they're going to have to see what that explosion is like. What is it, the recovery look like for Ian Wheeler? He's part of the competition. He'll be in a competition with Kyle Monungai. Those are guys you should probably get ready to watch in August in preseason games, right? Like DeAndre Swift, here's your 2 carries for August.
Right,
now we're going to turn it over to these other guys and see what they have to offer. And so it is an open backfield right now, and they're going to have to find answers. And again, I think Ben is very eager to get into this next phase now where they can start to do some of these experiments and some of this feeling out and actually work with these players on the grass to figure out who fits where.
All right, let's talk about the offensive line. Ozzie Trapillo. I think my prediction of this offseason is going to be there's going to be some shakeup at those tackle positions because there's a huge question mark after they don't take a left tackle. Is Braxton Jones going to be healthy coming off ankle surgery? And is Karan Amagaji ready to be a starting left tackle? Then they take Trapillo out of Boston College. He played right tackle. Ryan Poles mentioned that Darnell Wright can play left tackle. So you start grinding the gears of like, what is this going to shake out to be? Do you think that we're going to see a lot of shifting at those tackle positions?
In the short term, yes, I do. And I think, look, I asked Ryan Poles before the draft, do you see Darnell having the flexibility to go to the left side? He said absolutely. After the draft, he reiterated, absolutely. We see Darnell having the flexibility to go over to left. He did play there at Tennessee. And when you talk to the coaches at Tennessee, after the 2023 draft, they said the move to right wasn't performance-based. It was team needs-based. And so Darnell raised his hand, said, I can go over there and play the right side, and did really well there. So he does have the flexibility to go to the left side. I think the month of May, particularly at that position, is going to be a lot of mixing and matching. You mentioned Braxton Jones isn't going to be out there as he recovers from this ankle injury, so you need somebody to even just take the reps over there. So as you mix those pieces over there on the left side, you've got to mix some pieces on the right side. It's a okay experiment to take on. I think ideally, when we get toward those preseason games in August, you want to have pretty sturdy idea of where you want to go with that line because you don't want to spend the entire preseason like we've spent several preseasons
well, think about
going,
it the last couple of years. It's like
who's here, who's where, and who's everywhere.
Right. And I mean, Darnell Wright, I think he was asked too about the potential of playing left tackle, and he kind of didn't acknowledge that. So I'm like, well, that's an interesting thing too. Are you then concerned? You feel good about the interior right now because you bring in Joe Tooney, you trade for Jordan Jackson, and you address the center position with Drew Dahlman, and then you're like, you think we have it figured out. And people can say what they want about Braxton Jones. He might not be the end-all be-all at left tackle, but he has been serviceable given the fact that he's a 5th-round pick. Then you have the shakeup. Are you a little bit more concerned then of what's going to be in front of Caleb Williams for his second season? Well,
look, I'm less concerned than I was 4 months ago because of what they did to the interior. And so you feel like they did a lot to get themselves pushed in the right direction. Ozzie Trapillo is fascinating in this discussion because this is a 2nd-round pick. This isn't like a day 3 flyer that you're just crossing your fingers and hoping on. You take a guy in the 2nd round with a belief that he can become a major contributor for your football program. And so now it's up to them to develop him. You hear the word dependable thrown a ton when they talk about Ozzie Trapillo. No penalties in college, right? Like just
we'll take that on the offensive line.
Very reliable, sturdy, a tall guy who's got to kind of learn to use his height in different ways at the pro level. But if he can become what Braxton Jones was a couple years ago, where you come in as a rookie, no one knows what you're going to do, and by the end of minicamp, you've locked down a starting job. Well, now all of a sudden everybody feels better about what's in front of Caleb Williams. And so I think he's low-key a defining piece of this draft class, and we're going to have to see over the next 4, 5, 6 months what he turns into, because that could be a really big add to the football team, or it could be oh man, we didn't quite get that one right.
And there are plenty of 2nd-round picks, offensive linemen who turn into Pro Bowlers and have long careers. So that's not like it's an indictment on him at all. Speaking of that, how many of these draft picks, 8 of them, do you think are going to become either starters or major contributors in this first year? Knowing going into it, Ryan Poles said that he thought they could get 4 with those top 75 picks they had originally.
The 3 that we talked about have to be. Loveland has to be an impact player for you for not just his rookie season, for the next 9 years. Right, like that's the stakes of making a top 10 pick. You would expect Luther Burden to have an impact on this team. Trapillo, I would hope would become a starter by the time opening day rolls around. We'll see where that goes. Shamar Turner's a guy that's really fascinating because I think there's a ton of potential in there, but he's probably going to start out playing more of a role behind. I think the projected starters up front will be Grady Jarrett and then Jervon Dexter. And so now you've got to find your places to make an impact if you're Shamar Turner. You see how good he can be. He also has a rod in his leg, and he had a stress fracture that he played through for most of 2024. And so that's one of those ones where you're like, okay, file that away. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it's good, but the guy's got a rod in his leg to fix a stress fracture, and hopefully he can find full health and make an impact on this team as a rookie, and if not longer, obviously, as the Bears go forward.
So do you feel okay about the defensive line right now? Because they did bring in Grady Jarrett. They did bring in Dayo Dangbo. You don't know what Dayo Dangbo is going to look like in Chicago on the edge opposite of Montez Sweat. You're hoping Sweat has more production. And then also the safety position, because you're really hopeful that Jaquan Brisker makes it through this season. But history would show you he's had a ton of concussions, and there's not a ton of depth there either. And maybe you don't feel great about linebacker either.
Right, yeah, right. And we'll start with safety because I do think that they are lacking the depth that they'd want to have there. At this point in the offseason. Maybe they do find a way to address that position here in the coming weeks or months as we get towards the summer. Look, like there's a lot that goes into putting together a really productive defensive line. We saw what the Eagles did. You want to have waves and waves of bodies that you can turn loose and give specified roles and specified responsibilities to. And so I think Dennis Allen sees a group that can be versatile, that they can move Dayo Dangbo inside when they want to. I think they can move Shamar Turner around when they want to. You've got to get Montez Sweat producing at the level that he's paid to produce at, right? Like that's a big deal here. And a Dangbo for me is a really big dice roll because it's not there in terms of the proven production. And it's a belief that it can get there and that there's a lot of potential in there and that the fit in Dennis Allen's defense will unlock his best. But until we see that, that's a big leap of faith. So do I feel okay? Yes. Do I feel good? No. And so they've got to cross that bridge from okay to good somehow here in the next 6-7 months.
So will we see Kyler Gordon at safety?
Great question. I mean,
he brought it up. He was like, I want him out there.
Probably the most eye-opening revelation of the spring from the defense coordinator's mouth of trying to find different ways to use Kyler Gordon. And so now as we get out to these practices here in the spring and summer, we got to be, where's Kyler? Where's 6? He's not in the slot. Yeah, where's Spider-Man now? And then hopefully they find something that's really dynamic for him, really useful for him. And we all know how good of a playmaker he is. Look, and then you mentioned linebacker, like TJ Edwards gets rewarded. When you give guys contract extensions, Gordon and Edwards in particular, before they've ever practiced with the new staff, there's obviously a belief from the vision of the coaching staff that these guys can fit and play in your defense. I do think TJ is going to be asked to play in the middle more than he was last year under Matt Eberflus, and we'll see how that works out. They drafted a day 3 linebacker who's got a ton of speed in Ruben Hippolyte. It feels like a big dice roll. Special teams initially, but you're going to have to throw a third linebacker out there occasionally. Jack Sanborn's gone. Can you get this guy a role early on in his career? We'll see.
All right, you look at this team. You have Ben Johnson, and then you have the roster and this offense. We talked about it, overhauling the interior of their offensive line. They draft a tight end, another wide receiver. Mind you, they took Rome Odunze after Caleb Williams last year. Then you pair it with DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, DeAndre Swift. So on paper, it looks like you have everything you could possibly need to be an explosive offense. Maybe not a left tackle, which you would have liked to maybe address in this draft. What does this all mean for your quarterback, who you drafted #1 overall last year, that's now entering a second season where you're hoping to see it jump off the charts?
It's funny because Mark Grody and I were talking about this on the Take the North podcast about all the conversations we've had since before free agency to the end of the draft about all these topics that revolve around the Bears. And they're all relevant, significant topics. But the only topic that really matters is Caleb Williams.
How do we forget?
Does he make that huge developmental jump in his second season that everyone's expecting? And if he doesn't, the Bears have bigger problems than everything else we've ever talked about. The key here is now finding him the optimal way to maximize his talent. So what have they done since January? They've gotten him one of the most proven play callers in the league in Ben Johnson. They went out in free agency and via trade and bolstered the interior of his offensive line. We went through the long list of playmakers that he has to distribute the ball to. This is on Caleb now, right? Like Caleb has a huge year ahead of him. It's going to be very telling what his trajectory is by the time we get to New Year's Day. And at that point, we'll know the direction of the Chicago Bears for the next 5 years, right? If Caleb seems like he's on the escalator up, everyone's going to feel great no matter what the record is. If it feels like he's struggling and the click with Ben Johnson hasn't been there and the click with all these playmakers hasn't been there, Oh man, Cassie, buckle your seatbelt because it's going to get loud in this city.
There's always something that happens every Bears season that you never expected to come. So I think buckle up is the perfect way to put what we might see. And we won't really know until training camp as we start to watch each and every practice. And that's when you get to start to pick up on little ticks where you're noticing how they communicate together, body language, like how they're like talking to each other, or maybe Ben Johnson is coaching Caleb Williams and his response to that. So that's the fun of all this as we gear up for that.
We've talked also about the added responsibilities on Caleb's plate, going under center, learning how to run Ben Johnson's play action game, doing all the new things that he'll be asked to do. It's going to be a mountainous homework assignment for Caleb Williams. We'll see how he responds.
All right, Dan Wiederer, we appreciate your time. Thanks for
Always
coming on the
enjoy
Offseason.